In 1992, before smartphones, before social media, before AI, a man predicted exactly what would happen to your mind. He said a day would come when technology would stop serving culture and culture would start serving technology. When machines would not just assist human life, but begin to define what counts as true, what counts as valuable, even what counts as a problem worth solving. He called this state Technopoly. And if you've ever felt like you can't think clearly anymore, like your attention is fractured, your values are confused, and you're being quietly reprogrammed by your own devices, this book explains exactly why. Today we're reviewing one of the most prophetic books of the 20th century, Technopoly by Neil Postman. And by the end of this video, you will never look at your phone the same way again. Before we get into the book, you need to know who's talking. Neil Postman was an American author, media theorist, and professor at New York University, where he founded the field of media ecology. Essentially, the study of how the technologies we use to communicate shape our minds, our culture, and our societies. Postman is most famous for his earlier book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he argued that television had turned public discourse, politics, religion, education, news, into entertainment. Technopoly, published in 1992, is in many ways the sequel to that argument. It zooms out from television, specifically to technology as a whole, and asks a much bigger question. What happens to a culture when it stops asking whether a technology is good and only asks whether it works? What makes Postman worth listening to is that he is not a Luddite. He is not anti-technology. He's something more interesting. A critic who insists that every technology is a trade-off. It gives you something, and it takes something away. His entire intellectual project is forcing us to ask, what exactly are we losing? The book has 11 chapters, and Postman builds his argument in 3 stages. First, he gives you a framework, 3 types of societies and their relationship to technology. Then he shows you piece by piece how technology quietly takes over a culture's institutions: medicine, law, education, truth itself. And finally, he ends with what he calls the loving resistance fighter. His answer to the question, what do we actually do about this? Let's go through it chapter by chapter. 1, technology and culture. Postman opens with a parable. The story of King Thamus from Plato's Phaedrus. The god Theath invents writing and presents it to the king as a gift that will make people wiser. Thamus disagrees. He warns that writing will actually weaken memory because people will rely on external marks instead of their own minds. Postman's point, every new technology is a trade-off, a Faustian bargain. It gives and it takes away. The danger is that we usually celebrate what it gives and ignore what it takes. 2, from tool using to technocracy. Here, Postman introduces his framework of 3 types of societies. A tool-using culture uses technology to solve specific problems: building, farming, healing. But technology remains subordinate to the culture's belief system, religion, and social customs. A technocracy is the next stage. Technology begins to attack and undermine tradition. But the old worldview still exists, even if it's weakened. Postman uses the invention of the mechanical clock as his key example. Invented by monks to regulate prayer, it ended up giving birth to the synchronization of labor and eventually industrial capitalism. 3, from technocracy to technopoly. This is the chapter that gives the book its title. A technopoly, Postman says, is a society in which technology is not just powerful, it is sovereign. Tradition, religion, and social custom are not just weakened, they are made invisible, irrelevant, or dismantled entirely. In a technopoly, the central institutions of meaning-making, what is true, what is moral, what is real, are handed over to technology and the experts who serve it. Postman argued in 1992 that the United States was the world's only full technopoly. Watch this video again in 10 years and ask yourself how many other countries now qualify. 4, the improbable world. Postman runs a small experiment on his own colleagues. He invents a fake scientific study with absurd claims about jogging and weight loss and watches otherwise intelligent people accept it without question. His point, in a world flooded with information and stripped of a coherent worldview, people lose the ability to judge what's credible. We don't evaluate claims anymore. We just accept whatever sounds sufficiently scientific. 5, the broken defenses. Every culture, Postman argues, has traditionally had defenses against information overload. Religion, family structures, schools, government, institutions that filter what information matters and what doesn't. In a technopoly, these defenses break down. The printing press, the telegraph, and the photograph each accelerated the volume and speed of information beyond what those traditional filters could manage. We are left, he says, with information glut. More data than any worldview can organize into meaning. 6, the ideology of machines, medical technology. Postman compares American and British medicine to show how technopoly thinking infiltrates even healthcare. American medicine, he argues, became obsessed with technological intervention. Scans, machines, procedures, sometimes losing sight of the patient as a human being rather than a body to be measured. The deeper warning, when a profession's tools become more sophisticated, the profession starts asking, can we, instead of should we? 7, the ideology of machines, computer technology. Writing in 1992, Postman was remarkably ahead of his time here. He argues computers were being adopted with almost no critical scrutiny, treated as inherently progressive, inherently good, while the actual cost to human judgment, privacy, and meaning went undiscussed. He makes a sharp distinction. Computers are extraordinary at processing information, but they cannot tell you what's worth knowing or what's wise. That remains a human, and for us, a spiritual responsibility. 8, invisible technologies. Not every technology is a machine. Postman points to statistics and standardized testing as invisible technologies, tools that reshape how we think without us ever noticing the machinery. A test score or a statistic feels objective, neutral, scientific. But it quietly redefines what counts as success, intelligence, or worth, collapsing complex human realities into numbers. 9, scientism. Postman names the core faith of a technopoly, scientism, the belief that the methods of natural science can and should be applied to provide not just facts, but meaning, morality, and purpose. He argues this is a category error. Science can tell you how something works. It was never built to tell you how to live, what's good, or what your life is for. When a society asks science to answer those questions anyway, it gets confident-sounding nonsense dressed up as truth. 10. The great symbol drain. This might be the most quietly devastating chapter. Postman shows how commerce and technology drain meaning out of a culture's sacred symbols, not by attacking them, but by trivializing them through overuse. His example is Christmas, transformed from a sacred religious observance into a marketing season. He calls this process cultural rape, not destruction by force, but erosion by repetition and commercialization until the symbol is hollow. 11. The loving resistance fighter. In his final chapter, Postman offers his answer. He calls for people to become loving resistance fighters, people who use technology without surrendering to its ideology, who preserve the narratives and symbols that give a culture meaning. His proposed solution is education, but not technical training. He wants schools to teach the history and philosophy of technology itself, so the next generation grows up asking, what does this take from us? Instead of just, what does this give us? Now, here's why this book matters so deeply for us as Muslims. Postman's entire argument is that a technopoly strips a culture of its sacred narrative and replaces it with the false neutrality of technique and efficiency. He spends an entire chapter mourning the loss of symbols that once carried transcendent meaning. We are not watching this from the outside. The Muslim Ummah is living through exactly what Postman describes. Salah reduced to a notification on an app. Quran recitation consumed as background audio while scrolling. Even the symbols of Ramadan increasingly absorbed into commerce and aesthetic content. This is the great symbol drain happening to our own sacred practices. But here is where the Islamic tradition offers something Postman's secular framework cannot: a fixed reference point. Postman calls for loving resistance fighters, but he can't tell you what to resist for, only what to resist. The Quran and Sunnah give the Ummah exactly that, a fixed criterion, the Furqan, for judging whether a technology serves the deen or quietly replaces it. The prophetic model itself was deeply intentional about technology, adopting useful tools like the Persian method of digging trenches at the Battle of the Trench, while never letting any tool override revelation, justice, or the remembrance of God. That is what a loving resistance fighter rooted in Islam actually looks like. Postman wrote this book before the internet, before smartphones, before AI, and somehow described our exact moment with painful accuracy. His weakness is the same as Hans, a sharp diagnosis but a vague cure. Become a loving resistance fighter is a beautiful phrase, but it needs an anchor. As Muslims, we are not short of an anchor. We are short of the will to use it. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Where in your own life has technology quietly become sovereign over your deen instead of serving it? If you found this useful, subscribe. We're building a full library of book reviews like this one. Read through an Islamic lens. And tell me in the comments, which chapter hit hardest for you? This is the Enlightened study.